something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. Yeah, something sure is happening here, and it ain't exactly clear, although it's starting to get a lot clearer. Retake Our Democracy, and in this radio show and in our blog, in our new Zoominar series, tries to tell you more and more about what's going on, educate you about the issues, and activate you so that you can raise your voice. And that's a very important thing for you to be doing at this time. We're coming up to a primary election on June 2nd here in New Mexico, and we've certainly got chaos in the White House. And I hope all of you are staying safe and healthy and abiding by the governor's orders and staying home, wearing a mask. I think we're in for a long haul here. I also want to acknowledge that this show is being taped on Tewa land, stolen Tewa land, and I want to thank them. We have a real debt of gratitude to them for the stewardship that they have offered us in for the centuries that they have inhabited those lands. Yeah, and you're listening to Retake Our Democracy. It's a weekly show that airs on KSFR 101.1 FM, your public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson. I'm the host of Retake Our Democracy. And today I'm going to be speaking with State Senator Antoinette Sedillo Lopez. And you can listen to this now, and you can also watch it on our Zoominar after we're done with the show on Saturday. Antoinette is a pal. She was one of the few legislators we identified as heroes in our 2019 legislative report card, and for good reason. She's a fierce advocate for social, economic, and climate justice, and we're really happy to have her on the show today. Before we get started with that, I want to remind you that last week we had Maya Van Rossum on the show, and ironically, Antoinette will be doing a Zoom or a Facebook conversation with her. I believe it's on the 27th, a week from Thursday, or next Thursday, because this is going to be
I thought it was the 21st. I think it's the 21st.
Is it the 21st? Oh, wait a minute, I have a note here. It is the 21st, on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. And so Maya is the founder of the Green Amendment for the Generations, and also is the chief advocate, trying to get states like New Mexico to adopt the Green Amendment. And so we'll talk with Antoinette a little bit about that. The week before, we had a conversation with Sylvia Hayes, and she's the former first lady of the state of Oregon, and also an author and an advocate and an expert in sustainable economic development. And she wrote an article on the normal we were living in was not normal, or it was killing us. And it was an excellent article. It talked about how, to feed the corporate beast and to feed the economy, many of us have to work long hours, and this system isn't really working for us. It's working for the corporate elite. And she really zeroes in on that. And that was a very good conversation as well. You can get any of those past conversations by going to retakeourdemocracy.org, going to the menu bar, hovering over actions and events, and then you can see the Zoominar series. You can also see the Retake Conversations, which is what we're doing right this minute. The Zoominar series is a new thing that we've been doing. And our first one was a PRC candidate forum. We followed that up with a conversation with the state land commissioner, Stephanie Garcia Richard, and her attorney, chief of counsel, general counsel, Ari Birnov. And then 2 weeks ago, we had one with Dar Jamal, internationally known author of The End of Ice, and Greg Rogers, who's also an author and wrote I can't remember the name of the book, but it was a seminal piece on how the gas and oil industry accounting practices disguise their actual fiscal position and don't incorporate the costs for decommissioning, so that they can appear more profitable. And then at the end of the day, they just leave town and leave us holding the bag. And so that was just a great interview. People were just raved about that Zoominar. So you can get that at the same place on our website. I won't repeat it. So we're going to get started now and talk with Antoinette. Thank you for being here. I know it's crazy times. And so let's start just by letting you introduce yourself. We always like to let someone, our guests, introduce themselves and just tell us how you wound up in the state Senate.
It was a long, winding path, but so I was a law professor for 27 years. And then, 27 years is a long time to do anything. I became an executive director of Enlace Comunitario, which is a domestic violence agency that serves all, of course, but our target outreach was Latino immigrants. And I did that for 3 years. And then this president was selected by the Electoral College, is how I like to say it. And the impact on immigrants was immediate. And I started advocating, getting on the radio, getting on television, on being quoted in the newspaper, and people started calling me and saying, you should run for Michelle Lujan Grisham's seat. And they say it takes something like 7 asks of a woman to encourage her to run for office. Well, it took me about 11. And I just kept thinking about it. And I said, I should. I really should. I feel passionately about this, and I think I have something to offer. So I ran. I was not successful, but we elected a really great congresswoman. I'm very pleased with the work of Deb Haaland, who's just doing an amazing job. And so then after that, I became the legislator.
I agree, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and your fear is that someone will kind of change. She didn't. She's fabulous. And so then I was a legislative director. I became the legislative director for the New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And she says I did it for like a week, or she blinked. But then there was an opportunity to retain or to apply for the seat that Cisco McSorley vacated when he joined the Lujan Grisham administration. And so I applied, and I was selected, and here I am. I have loved it. And in a way, I think things have really worked out well, because we have a fabulous congresswoman, and I really am enjoying what I'm doing now. I think it suits me.
It's great. It's great. Yes, you have certainly injected a good progressive perspective in the state Senate. So you were appointed to the Senate by Michelle Lujan Grisham, and not all that much in advance of the session, if I recall correctly.
Oh my God, it was the day before the session.
That's what I thought. And so what was it like that must have been a kind of slap, not a slap in the face, but a kind of, whoa, what's going on?
They talk about drinking water out of a water hose. It was really drinking water out of a fire hose. It was a lot to learn, but I had developed a legislative agenda. And one of the things that I said to the county commission when I applied for this position is that I had spoken with constituents from throughout the congressional district, and had developed a legislative agenda that I wanted to pursue at the state level. And so that's what I set out. That's what I'm doing.
So you sponsored SB 459. That's the Fracking Moratorium bill. And I know from personal comments from many legislators, including Democrats, they would have preferred you not introduce that bill. What was the reaction of your colleagues? And remind our listeners how that all played out. I mean, before you answer, we only honored 4 legislators as heroes in the 2019 session, and you were one of them, in part for your doing this, but also for your almost solitary opposition to the Produced Water Act, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But it goes to you, and thank you so much for your service. What was the reaction?
Well, to my surprise, a lot of people were concerned. And and that just, I said, this actually, the moratorium that I proposed wasn't even as strong as it could be. It wasn't an absolute
Right.
moratorium. It was simply a pause for 4 years so that the state could do something it had not done. And I think it has an obligation to do, which is look at the impact of it on the people in the state. We knew about the problems with their release of the methane and the flares. We knew about that, yet there's no regulation of it. We knew that they were taking enormous amounts of water, and there was no study of the impact on any of the aquifers. We knew that they were producing water, which is a misnomer. I think it should be called toxic water, that they pollute, and big questions about what people were doing with it. We knew that because of the injection of that toxic water in Oklahoma, earthquakes
Right.
were happening. Well, did we know that about New Mexico? Where were they injecting it? So there's all these unknowns. We didn't know about the impact on public health. And so what I did is drafted a temporary pause, which would require each agency to make a report to the legislature with proposed legislation, and the cost within that 4 years, so that the legislature could do its job, which is regulate. That didn't seem to me so out there. It seemed to, in fact, when I met with some of the youth and they read it, they were like, this isn't a moratorium, it's just a temporary pause. And I said, yes, that's true. They want a moratorium.
They want to ban it, period.
Yes,
Keep it in
yes.
the ground.
Mm-hmm.
You know, COVID sort of took care of that in some ways.
Interestingly enough, we got a much more severe pause than this would have been.
And, you know, one of the things that's interesting is, you know, we had Stephanie Garcia Richard on not that long ago, and she tried in the last session to get a bill through the House to direct the State Investment Council or State Financial Council to do a study of what the decommissioning costs are going to be when, and at the time we didn't know that the bankruptcies were going to be in 3, 4, 5 months. We thought, you know, at some point these oil companies are going to leave, and because of the way they practice their accounting, they're going to stay until they run out of, not just run out of oil, but run out of money, and leave us with those costs. And that didn't get anywhere either. So it's a very parallel thing to what you went through.
It's outrageous because they don't, I mean, I've learned so much about the industry, and they were so leveraged that they weren't even making profits for their shareholders because they had gotten into such debt. They had no kind of reserve that was adequate to deal with this. And worst of all is, if and when they declare bankruptcy, especially these little ones, they'll just reincorporate and come back
Right,
after having left a mess for us to clean up.
right,
And of course that cost is never factored in. There are all these external costs, the health costs, the air pollution, the water, and we never measure them. So now I think it's really important that, well, since their pause was involuntary and certainly not required by the state, that we focus on when they come back in, doing what I set out. And that's what I'm going to focus on, is making sure that we have the regulations in place. Now, some people have told me, well, if you do that, they might not come back. And I said, if they can't do it responsibly, clean, you know, and reduce the impact on our health, why should they come back?
exactly, exactly. And, you know, you didn't really share with our listeners, and so I think many of them know what the fate of those bills, introducing it in 19 and 20, and how did that play out?
Well, the first, we got one hearing in 19, and that was kind of because I was vice chair of conservation.
Right,
And so we got the hearing. Unfortunately, time ran out, and the chair said, you know, cancel or ended the meeting, and then never rescheduled it, and we never got a vote.
right,
So that's how that one ended. And of course, in 2020, this year, I introduced it, and it was found by the Committee on Committees to not be germane, so it never even got a hearing.
Yeah, yeah, no surprise. For any of our listeners who want to find out more about how this not germane happens in terms of the committee and committees, and also how that position, the chair of that, happens, we have an excellent video on our website, Fix the Senate, that was the research of Eric Shimamoto and produced by Andy Fertel and myself and Eric. And it goes through exactly how, and it's all about the New Mexico State Senate, and it's how bills die in committees, but also how committee chairs get appointed, and how the way they're appointed, you wind up with committees that are basically stacked with conservative Democrats and Republicans actually holding the majority in, I believe it's 10 out of the 14 Senate committees. And so it makes it almost impossible to get a bill through the state Senate unless it's approved by Senator Smith, Senator Sanchez, Ramos, Munoz, and Papin. And so if you want to find out more about that, go to retakeourdemocracy.org. It's right on the right side of the homepage. You know, some may assert that you're introducing the fracking moratorium was basically torching your relationship with key Democratic leadership, and thereby possibly reducing your influence with those folks and in the Senate. I've often wondered about that, and the importance of having people like you who will rock the boat. But how does that go in terms of stepping on toes of colleagues who would have preferred not having to vote on some of these things? And how do you strike a balance between being a real advocate for social justice and being a kind of cagey legislator, just, you know, working the aisle?
Well, one of the things, it's interesting. I can't tell. I mean, the chair of conservation was a former student of mine. Joseph Cervantes was in my first class. And Peter Worth was a former student at the law school as well. And I have great relationships, personal relationships with them. And I have several of the other legislators were former students. And then others I knew in different professional capacities. And some of them counseled me, you know, this is going to be bad. The oil and gas industry is going to go after you. And I said, well, you know, if they go after me, it'll make me more popular in my district. Sorry, there's a plane. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear the plane too. We'll go on.
Oh my God. I live near the Air Force Base, and that was a very impressive plane. You know, the one that, you know, what did they call them, Ospreys or something? That was really an impressive plane. But anyway, and so they counseled me, well, the oil and gas industry will go after you. And I said, it'll make me more popular in my district, because I have a great district. And sure enough, in my town halls, when I've talked about that fracking bill, I get a lot of support from the district. The first time I got a standing ovation. So I believe that the people want this. Certainly the people in my district. And I've gotten calls from people from Carlsbad, from other places in the South, who, even though they won't testify, because I ask them, you know, will you testify at a hearing? And they won't, because of the community pressure. And
Right.
they're concerned. They're really concerned about the impact on their kids. And they're grateful that somebody is shining light on it.
Okay.
Now, in a way, being courageous is, I think, wielding your power. And I often think that sometimes women don't wield our power. And so when people tried to scare me, it was like, would you say the same thing to a male legislator? I don't know, you know, but I'm
You actually say that?
Yeah, you know, so yeah, I've said that a few times in the Senate, because, you know, we only have 9 women there.
Right.
And when I joined, it made it, so the first session's only 8 women. And then Shannon Pinto joined, and now there's 9. But
There could be a few new ones.
we'll see.
Yeah. I want to remind our listeners that it is in times like these that KSFR is so important. It's your public radio station. It brings you great news, great music, and informative shows like Retake and Democracy Now! And Economic Update with Richard Wolff. All of these are great shows, but they don't come free. And I know that KSFR is in need of donations right now. So if you can spare 10 or 20 bucks, go to ksfr.org and click on the donate button and just view it as your personal ticket for admission to a host of really good shows. So if you could do that, really appreciate it. You and Senator Joseph Cervantes, we're speaking with Senator Sedillo Lopez, Antoinette Sedillo Lopez right now. And you and Senator Joseph Cervantes, your former student, were the only Democrats who voted against what has become known as the Produced Water Act, or as Brian Egolf, the speaker, likes to call it, the most important piece of environmental legislation in the history of New Mexico. He said that on my radio show. Why did you vote no?
Well, if it's most important, it's because it has really horrible potential for an impact in New Mexico. One of the problems, the standing alone, is horrific, because what it did is it kind of commodified water, which isn't the way water works in New Mexico. Water belongs to the people, and it commodified it. It asked the environmental department to create regulations for the reuse of it, with a presumption that there would be a reuse of it. And it didn't. The other thing is, it didn't give it a lot of guidance. Like, at least if it would have said, bring the water up to the standard of the Clean Water Act, at least that at least there was going to be a goal. And it didn't have that. It had no standards. I saw it very weak on regulation and sort of protecting the oil and gas industry if they reused it. I mean, they could always reuse it in their process, but to reuse it for other uses, such as agriculture,
Really?
I was concerned. But in order to make it a little bit, Senator Martinez added a provision in it that I think was to try to get more Democrats to support it, and maybe that's what they did. We had an unfortunate Court of Appeals decision, I guess like 11 years ago, maybe more, saying that only the Attorney General could impose fines on the industry, that the agency could not go to court and impose fines for violations of the standards. Now, the standards are weak to begin with, and then to basically limit the agency from pursuing them and putting it all on the Attorney General's office, which has a whole lot on its plate. And I'm not aware they even have an environmental division and how much expertise they have. But even if they did, it's an overwhelming responsibility given the number of wells. So what this legislation did is it gave the agency the power to fine up to $10,000 a day. And I think it was a cap of maybe $250,000 a day. Well, on the one hand, that's good that the agency could actually try to enforce its regulations. That was a good thing. I thought it was pretty pitiful, because I think $10,000 could be seen, when you're talking about this much money, as simply a cost of doing business.
Right.
And then it required that those cases be litigated where the oil rigs are. And I know, because of the culture and how important the industry is, that that's not a very neutral forum. So I thought the whole thing. I
did not know this.
So I thought the whole thing was a disaster, and I voted against it. And the other thing was I was literally reading it on the fly, because it passed through so quickly.
Right.
There was I was online reading one thing, and then they passed something out that looked completely different. And it was like, well, wait a minute. So it was very, very difficult. And I voted no. And I think Joseph saw that too.
Yeah, and it was, I think, intentionally done this way. I mean, it was brought in at the very last minute. I know when I had Speaker Egolf on the show, it was like right after the session. And I mean, he basically, I asked him like, well, if it's not going to be used for agriculture forever, because he was saying it'll never be used for agriculture. And I go, well, then why would you put that in the language of the bill? You know, if it's never going to be used for agriculture,
So
why say it can be used for agriculture?
if it had, I might have voted for it if it had been clear like that, but
Yeah,
it wasn't clear.
right.
Um,
And I
you
hadn't
know,
known what you said about the Clear Water Act. I mean, that's, you know, that's a measure.
a measure. It has no standards. So the standards are being developed. And the truth is we have a pretty good environmental department with this governor, much
Mhm.
better than our last governor.
Of course.
Well, we're not always gonna have the same department. So
Exactly.
I really wanted clarity in, if you're gonna regulate produced water, which wasn't necessarily a bad idea. I actually had a competing produced water bill that would have put it all in the hands of the environmental department and had very clear standards, but that didn't go anywhere.
It didn't. Well, it was probably not germane, right?
No, no, it just well, this bill is the one that
That
kind of got,
advanced.
yeah. And so, and it went so fast, like it didn't even get a conservation vote because it went through the House.
Right.
And it was just really, really quick. I definitely would have tried to amend it even on the floor if we had had more time.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, um, let's transition here to something more hopeful. I had a interview with Maya Van Rossum last week, and I gleaned from it that you'll be doing a kind of Facebook conversation on the 21st, and you're going to be talking about the Green Amendment. So, what do you know about the Green Amendment? Are you thinking of in terms of introducing it in 2021? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what's I'm always citing Article 20, Section 21 of our New Mexico Constitution, which was passed in 1971, and it basically makes the environment of fundamental importance in our state. And then it directs legislators to examine and to legislate to protect our water, our air, and our land are, I believe, the words it uses in the amendment. So I'm always citing that because I feel that we as a legislature have an obligation to do that. Well, there was a case in New Mexico about 10 years ago, maybe, yeah, about 10 years ago, where the court said that this was not an individual right of a person to the environment, to clean air, clean water. This was a direction to the legislature. And as long as the legislature did anything, they were okay. Now, I think you could argue that the legislature hasn't done enough in furtherance of this. I think there's an argument out there, but I started thinking about it, and I actually said that. So when Maya contacted me, and that's another benefit of having sponsored the fracking bill, you kind of get noticed, and so so Maya contacted me and said, and told it to me. I said, well, we have Article 21. And she said, yeah, but it's not an individual right. And I think she's absolutely right. We need an individual, personal right to clean air, water, and land.
Well, you know, we're about out of time for the radio show, but Antoinette and I are going to keep yakking, and that will be available at retakeourdemocracy.org, hovering over the menu there above actions and events, and you'll see Retake Conversations, and that video recording will be available Saturday, probably by 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning after it airs. We don't want to preempt our own radio show by putting it out there earlier. But that's all the time we have for now. We'll be back next week, and we've got a couple of really good shows coming up. I can't tell you who they are just yet because I don't know what order it's going to happen, but look for information at retakeourdemocracy.org. Stay safe, stay active. It's the only way we're going to fix this mess. So we'll be back next week. We're back to podcast land. We have to pause there for a second so that the radio station knows where the radio show should cut off. And so now we're on podcast time, so we can be a little more informal as well. And I'll just mention that we gerrymandered so that this show is actually introduced with the Buffalo Springfield theme song. I'm not quite sure how well that worked. So if it came in a little garbled when we began, I apologize, and we'll work on that some more. So we were talking about the Green Amendment, and we're talking with Antoinette Sedillo Lopez. And those of you who are watching this now on podcast obviously know who we're talking with. And so you don't have to keep repeating it like you do on the radio show. The Green Amendment, is that something you're thinking you're going to actually introduce in 2021, or is that still just in the formative stage?
It's in the formative stages, but I'm excited about the possibility. I read Maya's book, and I recommend it. I really, I meant to bring a copy out here to plug it. It's an excellent book, and it talks about her journey and then her analysis of a Green Amendment. And when you think about it, as humans, we should have a human right to clean air, water, and land. That's so basic, but we don't have that stated anywhere. And it's not in our federal constitution. And while we do have what I call the quasi, the direction to the legislature in New Mexico, I think it would be very powerful, especially as we start reopening. I think that it would be great to have the consciousness of what this impact of reopening is going to have on our planet and on our environment. And so I'd like to see it, because then that the whole consciousness of what we're doing to our planet will be documented and right there in our New Mexico State Constitution. And so, like I said, it's in the planning stages in the sense that you want to build support for it. I mean, I jumped into the fracking bill because I was appointed the day before the session. Well, now that we have time, I think it's important to build support among other legislators, because literally I drafted the thing with the Legislative Counsel's office, and then I was running around asking legislators to support it. And so now I have time to really talk about it with legislators, talk about what it means, and then more importantly, get community support for it. And if that happens, we'll have a much better chance of getting it on the ballot.
We'll help you with that. We'll help you with that for sure. I'm wondering if you've read the report from Common Cause New Mexico and New Mexico Ethics Watch. Okay, you're nodding your head.
I did.
And if you've read it, what did you think? And given COVID and the vast reduction in gas and oil revenue to the state, do you think NMOGA and their lobbying allies will actually have more or less influence in 2021?
You know,
about how much they're contributing to the state.
Yeah, anymore. I think it depends on how much money they have, and it's like if they're crying for a bailout, and then you're spending all this money on campaigns, it's like something's wrong there.
Right.
But I don't know. I think that we've made some inroads by just showing attention on the issues. And so I think that now they were bragging about how they really funded education in this state. Well, they're not bragging now. And so, in fact, the idea that if they go and declare bankruptcy after all of this bragging and leave our state in a mess, I don't think they're going to have the same influence. I really hope that they're much better than that. Because if they do, I just don't think the legislators are going to put up with it.
So I read the report carefully, and you know, they listed the legislators who received contributions from gas and oil and how much. And it won't surprise you or our listeners that among Democratic state senators, the top 4 beneficiaries of gas and oil largesse are in order from most to least: George Munoz, then Mary Kay Papin, then Clemente Sanchez, and then John Arthur Smith. Pretty much 4/5 of the corporate Democrats that are being targeted by Working Families Party and others. I should note that I did not see your name on the list at all. I take it that you don't take contributions from gas and oil.
Well, there's a no fossil fuel pledge, which I really urge your organization and your listeners to ask your legislators to sign.
Uh-huh.
What's interesting about the pledge is it says, I will not take more than $250. And I thought whoever created this thinks that $250 isn't a lot of money. Well, in this state, at least for me, it's a lot of money. But I signed the pledge and I crossed out no more than 250 and said, no, I'm not taking fossil fuels money. um, I think it's really important that people not see their legislators as beholden to an industry like that. I'm not
Mhm.
taking any gun money at all, no NRA money, didn't even submit the questionnaire. I think it's really important to put your money where your mouth is. And once you start, because what they say, of course, they're not buying a vote. They're buying time with the legislature.
Mhm.
And my thing is I need to listen to everyone, and you shouldn't have to pay for time with me. You know, all you should be able to do is call me up and talk to me. And so that's why I'm doing that. And I think
Okay.
it's really, really important.
Yeah.
Breeds
Um,
confidence.
that's we've worked our way through 10 questions now, and we've barely talked about COVID, which is kind of refreshing. It's on everybody's mind. How do you see it impacting the legislative process, and beginning with the interim hearings, the anticipated special budget session, and the 2021 session? So now just more about the logistics of how the legislature is going to do its job in this craziness.
Well, my understanding is the Senate, our group, is not going to try to do it virtually, but the House is going to try to do it virtually through a Zoom meeting. Well, in order to have that happen, you have to actually change the rules.
Right.
So at least part of it is going to be in person for the House because they've got to go in and change the rules. So there will be some rule changes. And one of the things that I think is really important is that there be transparency
Right.
throughout. Like one of the things I love about our legislature is you can just go in
Right.
anytime, see it, talk to people, watch them walk through the hallways and catch up with them. And so that really concerns me. So we need to maintain that level of transparency as we figure out how we do this. Um, there will be social distancing. My understanding is we're all going to be asked to take a COVID test before we go up and then another one afterwards, because they're very concerned about spreading. I mean, if you think about it, it's a huge little petri dish. When you think about how that process works, there's so many people there, um, and we're a huggy state. You're always hugging people and shaking hands, and so it's going to have a whole different feel. But they're going to be very, very careful, and we want to model good behavior. I mean, I'll be wearing a mask, um, and we want to do this well. But
You think there will be like testimony and committee hearings, and will the public be able to attend, or how will
I,
it play out?
we have the technology to do that, and that's what I think is important that we do it. So that in committee hearings, I think, but it's going to require, like some people show up and decide they're going to talk at that moment. They want to listen to things and see that whether they want to say
Right.
that. It's going to be really rough because you're going to have to make arrangements,
Right.
say something, unless they have a raise your hand function or something in Zoom. I don't know. I think that's going to be tough. And it's something that I think our legislature is very proud of, is having as much community input and interaction as possible.
I don't know what I'd do. I'd be, I was there every day, all day, and
Now you'll be just wed to your computer.
well, yeah, I've been experiencing a lot of that. There are some days where 5 or 6 hours of Zoom, and
I don't know, because that's one of the things I love the best is, like, a lot gets done with citizens just hanging out and
right,
talking to legislators.
right.
And so we'll see how it goes. But I think it's very important that we show up. When we have all these first responders showing up, we have all these essential workers. This is the essential work of the people.
Right.
So I'll be there.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to be safe. It's going to be different, that's for sure. So what about just how are you experiencing COVID, and what do you anticipate in terms of like what kinds of changes in perspective our larger community, our national community are going to have as a result of this? It's kind of scary right now how divided things are.
You know, it's shocking how divided things are. I would think that safety and health would be the number one priority of most individuals and most policymakers. So, but then we have, well, you know, we have a crazy man in the White House. Um, and I think he just, I don't know, he makes it so that people feel okay to say these outrageous things and to do these outrageous things.
Right, right.
I, I don't know. Personally, it's been hard to be isolated. I'm lucky because my daughter and my grandson are living with us at the moment, so that's been nice. But it's a different world, and until we have a vaccine and or a cure, um, we're going to be separated like that. I think that there's some silver linings in that the environment, we're taking a pause.
Mhm.
And now people can see the hills outside of LA. You can hear birds. I don't know if, you know, you can hear birds in the environment just much, I don't know if you can hear them. I hear them here. Um,
I can hear the wind chimes.
oh, the wind. Um, Luckily, the dog's not barking. But you can, and so I'm hoping that people will see that we can get back into this slowly and with care.
Mhm.
Um, and then the other thing that actually I was sort of disappointed is it's also revealed the inequities in our society. People who don't have access to health care. This shows me that we really need Medicare for all. I mean,
Right.
it's so obvious and so clear. To actually have someone who's uninsured in this time is is just unspeakably horrible. And then um, it showed like people who don't have the luxury of staying home, but also don't even have the luxury of isolating somebody who's sick in their home
Right.
because, you know, they don't have an extra bedroom to put someone who's sick in.
Right.
They don't, you know, people who just don't have the resources, no running water. So I would have expected that to generate outrage and saying, and people saying we need to fix this. Um, there are people who are saying that, but it's not uniform, and
Right.
that's surprising to me.
Yeah. I mean, this is not directly related to COVID, but I've been long fearful that Trump would either cancel the election um, or disregard the results. If he loses, he just says it's a hoax. I'm not abiding by these results. And that's that. And then on Fox News, they'd be reporting about the massive voter fraud across the country and how the Democrats tried to steal the White House. And when you see some of these protesters protesting against shelter in place, they don't look, I mean, they look scary. And I think Trump would set them, you know, like, if you think this was an unfair election, go to your state house. I could see him doing that. And could you see that happen?
Well, I have faith in our democratic institutions and that people would not permit it. And I think they're definitely the minority in this state. People like that are definitely the not going to be able to do it. Um, I just think there are a lot of us who would stand up and say no.
Yeah, I got to hope so. But I don't see the Senate in the U.S. Senate or the Supreme Court even necessarily. It's going to be a very, very, very interesting, and it's going to be a bizarre election. It's hard to predict how the COVID is going to impact the whole process, you know, in terms of who gets
Yeah.
to vote, who doesn't vote, whatnot.
Well, maybe I live in a bubble, but I just think that he's going to lose so badly that it'll be hard to shake.
Yeah. Well, speaking of elections, you have a Republican challenger, and I'm
I
guessing
do. I do.
uh, uh, I'm guessing your opponent will benefit from a ton of misleading mailers and TV and radio ads painting you as the second coming of Fidel Castro.
Well, what they did in
Going to
Congress,
gear up for that, huh?
yeah. Well, what they did, I think once you've gone through it, you realize it's not that bad. For the congressional race, some outfit out in the Midwest, and they were connected to the Republican Party. I don't know why they targeted Deb Haaland and me for some reason, the two women in the race. And the one they said about me is they put my head on the body of a man, and then they said that we didn't pay our taxes and that I supported Medicare for all. Well, the Medicare for all was absolutely true, but we pay our taxes. You know how you can pay the first part and then you pay your second part?
Right,
Well,
right.
they were saying the second part was not paying our taxes on time, and that's what they said. So it was like, and I was able in the debate to respond to it. So I don't know. I mean, I think you just have to save enough money to have a mailing that responds to whatever they
Right.
threw at you. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's my strategy.
Well, and you've
Oh,
got, you said when we were talking before we started the show that you're in a really good district. You've got a good constituency. They probably trust you. And when they hear that you're going to lead them straight into hell or bankruptcy, they're going to think twice.
Well, I think I believe that. I believe that people would, it just depends on what they say. The stupid thing about not paying taxes, just was untrue. Um, Now, if they say, oh, she's going to stop fracking in this state, it's like, well, maybe, who knows? But it just, I don't know. I don't know what will happen. You never know what will happen in an election.
Yeah.
Um, and I have been attacked by oil and gas on Twitter and just other things, and it seems to make me stronger.
Stronger with us, that's for sure. So one of the premises of Retake Our Democracy is that the systems that, and I'm talking about economic and political systems, that have landed us in the kind of wealth inequality and climate catastrophe that we're living in order to fix that system, we need a new system. That just tweaking around the edges isn't going to really work. And so we need a new system of economic approach and political approach. What would that kind of new invented system look like to you?
I think it would be a system, a hybrid, because you definitely you need to fill the gaps in a system, in an economy, a capitalist economy. There are so many gaps in it. And so Europe, many of the countries in Europe really have the right idea. Just as an example, I've been a big supporter of Medicare for all. And I think it really hurts our companies here, especially the small companies, to put the burden of insurance on them.
Right.
It's ridiculous. And so we're competing with companies in Mexico and in Canada right next door, where but companies don't have to worry about that. And so I think a system that provides the basics, healthcare, clean water, clean air, and I believe housing, a minimum adequate housing, is a system where everybody could thrive. And that's the kind of place I'd like to live in, and move toward. One of my children laughed and said, "Oh, that's kind of like Star Trek," and I said, "Yeah, maybe."
What about a guaranteed annual income, minimum income? What do you think?
I would like to explore that. I've read a little bit about that. It hasn't really, the way our system is a safety net, it kind of thing. And so, I mean, that's kind of how I felt about, you do want to incentivize excellence, and you want to incentivize people. And I worry, I guess, a little bit about what that might do to a people. But I don't know. I mean, it's something that I think is definitely something to explore. Like I said, I always viewed safety net is what I want. Nobody should be homeless. Nobody should be hungry. Nobody should not have access to clean water.
Mhm.
And so that's the basics. If it requires income to ensure, I mean, now we do it with food stamps. You
Right.
know, income would give somebody more discretion. Is that good or bad? I'd like to see more about it and learn more
Mhm.
about it. But I
Well,
definitely think that the basics need to be covered.
one thing, I don't know if you've ever encountered the Next Systems Project or the Democracy Collaborative, the work they do. That's Gara Alperovitz was the guy who launched that some years ago. And, but that's what that organization is. I'll send you a link. I see you're writing something down.
Writing down, yeah.
Send you the link to it. They do excellent studies on like reinventing a new way of doing. And so they've got stuff on how we should nationalize our energy across the country and take it out of the private sector's hands completely.
Well,
And things
they,
like that.
they did that in Mexico,
Mhm.
as you know, and it turned out to not work, basically because there was so much corruption,
Right.
which is a danger and a problem when you really have to work on ensuring that that doesn't happen. But nationalizing it didn't keep the prices low, um, or maybe it kept it lower than they would have been, but they weren't low. They
Right.
were still inaccessible to poor people, and a lot of people got rich that shouldn't have gotten rich off it.
Mhm. Well, to your point, though, if you've ever dove into P&M and their chicanery, a group of folks from here in Santa Fe formed a group called Shareholders for a Responsible Planet or something. And we all bought shares in P&M about 5 years ago so that we could participate in their annual shareholders meeting. And we would ask extremely difficult questions. We would take our time in asking the question and fill in a lot of facts that are not things that P&M would necessarily have wanted to share with their institutional shareholders, but
Well,
would embed that in the question, and then they would have to answer. And unfortunately, you can't come back with a clarifying question or anything like that. So they're very good at their PR stuff. But we've gotten to be pretty intimately aware of how in a private company owning the energy or doing the transmission and so forth, it certainly is pretty
it
corrupt.
could be corrupt.
Yeah, and so I think to your point, though, we since Reagan, he what was his famous quote of the 9 words that you least want to hear is "I'm from government and I'm here to fix your
Here
problem,
to help. Yeah.
here to help you."
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
has just been a really unfortunate 60 years of just like, the government can't do anything. We'll privatize, privatize, privatize. Now we're seeing that they're going to try and privatize the postal service by running it out of business. It's just not a good thing.
Yeah. No. And look what they did with the prisons, the
Yeah,
private prisons.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
No, there are definitely basic, important government functions that need to exist and need to be well functioning. The post office, I believe the prisons are two basic government functions that should never be privatized. And
yeah.
well, I didn't like it when even the UNM started privatizing the cleaning services, because that meant that they were no longer employees. They weren't getting
Like
health
benefits.
care. They
Right.
weren't getting benefits. They weren't getting retirement. That was really a bad move. That's why private industry could do it cheaper, because uh, they don't provide for their employees, and that's why we need regulation. That's why we need the government to kind of
Well,
curb greed.
I think we're going to see a bill introduced. In fact, I'm quite sure we are. We're going to have on June 23rd, I think it is, the people from the public banking community here
Oh, good.
And they have a bill ready to go, and it's a 5-year. It's not a study. It's not a memorial. It's a bill to create,
Plan to do it.
to plan it, and to do it, and a
And
state.
maybe they could be in the post office.
Yeah, and there's a lot of research out there that would show that that would really serve our state well. And so I'll make sure you know about it when we have the Zoominar with them on. So because we're trying to include more and more legislators watching. Joanne Ferrari's been watching all of the Zoominars. I think Andrea Romero has. A few of our city councilors have. But we want to have more legislators, because the next one is going to be about the influence of gas and oil money in the legislature. And then we've got one with New Mexico Voices and Javier Martinez, the chair of Tax and Revenue in the House, talking about the state budget crisis. That'll be just a couple of weeks before the special session. So those kinds of things, it would benefit from having more legislators being part of that conversation.
I will definitely tune in.
Okay, so we've got one last question. And then you can go back to your family and your dog. And when you look at COVID and you face the uncertain future that we have with the climate crisis, are you optimistic? And if so, why?
You know, the reason I'm optimistic is because of our youth and the children. You know, I think one of the things I see with young people is they're just not going to put up with this crap. And that's basically how they say it.
Yeah.
And I think that they give me a lot of hope for the future. And I feel bad if we cannot improve things for them so that they have a future that is bright. But I am an optimist. And so I do believe that we're going to find a cure and a vaccination in due time. And while we'll never be exactly the same, I think that we have an opportunity to make improvements. And I love that quote, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. And I believe that's true.
We got to flatten that curve, get it here a lot sooner. Thank you for a great conversation, Antoinette. We'll have to do it again. And good luck with your election campaign. Good luck with the special session. And hopefully by January, I'll be able to see you in the halls of the Roundhouse.
I hope so.
Thank you very much for being with us on Retake Our Democracy. Thank
Great.
you, listeners. We'll be back next week, and be safe, be healthy, and stay active. It's the only way we fix this mess. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. And thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay.
Trying
So